All right. I'd like to welcome you to the Lawrence Douglas County Planning Commission, Metropolitan Planning Commission meeting for June 28th. Our first order of business is to elect officers for 2017. So we'll accept nominations for, let's start with chair for 2017-18. Do we have any nominations? I'll be happy to nominate Eric Struckoff for chair, seconded by Commissioner Sands. Any other nominations? Nominations are closed. All in favor for Commissioner Struckoff, please raise your hand. Passes 8-0. 7-0, my bad. This is why they kicked me off. This is why I don't get to do this anymore. Nominations for vice chair. Commissioner Culver.
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Willie for vice chair, please.
Thank you. Second on that?
Second.
Second, Commissioner Sands. Any other nominations? Seeing none, we'll take a vote. All those in favor of Commissioner Willie as vice chair, please raise your hand. Passes 7-0. With that, we will turn over chair duties to Commissioner Struckoff.
All right. Thank you, former Commissioner Kelly. It's my first act as new chair.
I'm still on the commission.
Former chair.
See? Spotlight's pretty bright, isn't it? Yeah.
I was hurrying, wasn't I? For my first act as chair, I would like to take a moment to recognize your service to this city, to this county, and to this commission.
Thank
As
you.
chair from 2016 to 2017. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I guess I'm supposed to say something.
A few words.
A few words. It's just a real privilege to chair this group. These are very committed citizens of Lawrence and Douglas County, and it's always fun to pull them together every month and talk about the issues that we talk about. I'm excited to go back to being a commissioner. You'll understand that here soon, Commissioner Struckoff. Not for the responsibility, but just it's a different role. So, but I want to thank the commission for your support and most of the time, best behavior through the past year. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kelly. I would like to just say that this commission has been well served by your chairmanship, and I will hopefully be able to follow the example you set of leadership and confidence and direction and organization that has made this efficient and very successful, I think, planning body. And I would also hope to uphold the legacies of the chairs that preceded you since I've been on this commission since 2013, starting with Commissioner Culver was chair when I first joined, Commissioner Lees, then Commissioner Britton, and you. So congratulations, and hope I can do you proud. Well, then let's get into our first item tonight. First item is to receive and approve the minutes from the May 24th, 2017 meeting. Are there any additions or comments on the minutes from that meeting? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve.
Moved by Commissioner Kelly.
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Culver. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Passes 7-0 with one abstention. Are there any committee reports to receive from the past month? Commissioner Culver.
Well, I was unable to attend the most recent Transportation 2040 Update Steering Committee, but Scott could update the commission as to what we did the last meeting, and also to note, we have a mid-month meeting in August that will give us some more updates on that plan. But Scott, if you'd like to update the commission?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Culver. That committee and staff are going crazy on the Transportation 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. update that is required every 5 years to be comprehensively updated, and it's due March of 2018. And so what the committee looked at most recently, and this is all posted on the website, is the public input received to date on it from a host of different methods and methodologies to receive that input, a lot of stakeholder interviews and survey work and that kind of thing. They had, the MPO staff has the part one of the plan, which are introduction, existing conditions, and plan development sort of outlined. So we looked at that and reviewed that and offered comments. We talked a lot about the fiscal realities. As many of you are aware, a transportation plan has to be fiscally constrained, meaning we can't plan for more projects than we are able to pay for over our 5 years worth of planning efforts. And of course, one of the big issues this go around is the sales tax question. And unfortunately, because the plan is due March, we have to sort of get out there options about, well, if you get a sales tax, because there's talk about putting a sales tax to the vote in November to pay for certain types of transportation infrastructure, including bike ped and streets and highways. So we talked about that. We also talked about a issue you've recently seen, which is the 19th Street connectivity issue to Venture Park, and the coalition that has formed recently of about 4 or 5 neighborhoods presented some information to the group for consideration, and ultimately there's a component of our transportation plan that will address that future thoroughfare map and how or whether that connects and what it's designated as in terms of collector, arterial, that kind of thing. So it's a timely update to this group. While you don't necessarily see the transportation plan, you will with the comprehensive plan update, and some of you will see it with your service to the MPO.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Commissioner Coble. The next portion of our meeting, we receive any communications. For instance, were there any written communications from the public not included in our packet?
There were not.
Were there any communications from staff, commissioners, or planning commissioners, or other commissioners?
Mr. Chairman, I might just verbally update you on another committee that will meet at the end of July, and that's the Horizon 2020 Steering Committee. We plan on posting a draft of the updated comprehensive plan in mid-July before our next meeting with you, and so would urge you all to look for that draft. Commissioner Britton, who is no longer on the Planning Commission, obviously is no longer on that committee. We have determined, because that committee, we think, only has a few more meetings, maybe 2 more meetings at the most. It could go longer depending on what the committee decides, to not fill that position on the Horizon 2020 Steering Committee. If the committee decides to do more process than we are going to propose them to do in their July meeting, we might revisit that issue. But as it stands, Commissioner Kelly is the liaison between this group and that committee. So,
Thank you. Do we have any action of waiver requests or terminations from the city engineer?
no, sir.
One thing we must do as commissioners is disclose any ex parte communications that we've had with public, so that every commissioner can understand the discussions that their fellow commissioners have had with members of the public or applicants and so forth. Are there any discussions or ex parte communications any commissioners care to disclose? And are there any abstentions that commissioners must make on any of the agenda items tonight? All right. And with that, let's move on to our regular agenda. May I have a show of hands, please, to see who is here to discuss the cell phone tower issue? Anybody here to discuss a different issue? One. Sir, can you tell me which issue you'd like?
The wildlife fence.
Okay. Okay. Given the number of people to speak on the cell tower, I would entertain a motion to move that to the back of the agenda, becoming item number 4.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Kelly. Any second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Weaver. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Motion passes 7-0 with 1 abstention. With that, we will move the cell tower discussion to the final item tonight. I'll give you a little bit of background about how we operate the meetings here. First, a staff member from planning will give us a presentation on the application. That will be followed by any statement or comments or presentation by the applicant themselves, followed by public comment on the agenda item. We ask that you keep your comments, if you're speaking for yourself, to 3 minutes. If you're representing an organization or a neighborhood group, for instance, then you are given 5 minutes to speak on behalf of that organization. If the commissioners ask you a question, please constrain your remarks and response to the question itself, if you don't mind. With that, let's go on to what was item 2, the Airport Zoning Commission. At this point, the commission must recess to the Airport Zoning Commission. And we will reconvene as the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission after this agenda item. Scott, is there a formal?
Nope,
That's it?
You're now sitting
I just say
as,
it?
We're
All right.
now
as the Airport Zoning Commission.
We're now the Airport Zoning Commission.
Add that to your resume.
I'll just type that.
Exactly what I was going to say. Darn it.
Okay.
Your first day.
Yes, exactly. Sandy?
Sandy Day, Planning. This is a unique item for you to be considering this evening. It is actually a site plan, but in your role as the Airport Zoning Commission, you do get to review projects that require building permits for the project. So the Lawrence Municipal Airport is obviously located in Grant Township. It is incorporated property surrounded by unincorporated property in that part of the county. So the proposed wildlife fence is a result of a study that was done initially in 2012 and has continued to be updated for wildlife, specifically things that don't fly. So for the coyotes and the deer and the badgers, it was determined that a wildlife fence was needed around the operation portions of the airport. So all of the property that's owned by the city is not being fenced. It's just those immediate areas where there are operational activities, the taxiways, the runways, and some of these other areas that have to be protected. So this slide highlights where that fence is proposed. This is not necessarily a security fence. It will have a number of gates to it. It is a chain link fence, as you see in the slides and in your packet. It also has a feature that has some underground, below grade improvements to prevent burrowing. There may be some very small lights attached to the fence to meet some requirements for the FAA for portions that I think that's the object-free zone. And we have staff here also that can address more details if you have questions about the project. So your role really is about approving the site plan. There will be a fence that will go to the development services side of things because of the height, and we're asking that you recommend approval, or that you approve it. You're the final body on this.
All right, thank you, Sandy. Is there anybody here to speak on behalf of the airport? The applicant or representative of the applicant?
Okay, I think that's me because I'm one of the landowners. One thing I have a question and then a statement. A question is, how does this fit into the long-range airport plan of extending the runways that has blighted several properties? They marked a number for acquisition. And I want to know if this is part of the execution of that plan, or is this a standalone scenario? Another thing is, I live at the very corner of 2440 on the south side, and my property runs right up against and includes some of the crash zone.
Okay, before you continue,
Okay.
I would like to have the applicant or representative of the applicant from the airport.
I'm sorry.
to
I thought I
speak.
was the only one here.
No worries. Thank you, and we'll certainly have an opportunity to speak.
Respectful.
Is there a member of the airport board here? Thank you.
Evening, Commissioners. My name is Rick Bryant, and I represent Airport Development Group. We've been the engineering and planning consultant for the Lawrence Municipal Airport since 1990. The action we bring before you tonight is for this wildlife hazard fence as a result of a study. Quick background, the FAA, getting over a little cold, so pardon my hoarseness. As an outcome of the Miracle on the Hudson, where the bird strike landed the airliner in the Hudson, the FAA took a very rapid approach to making sure that airport operation areas were secure against avian and mammal species on airport properties. The commercial airports across the country were the first wave to go under the review and update fences, followed by general aviation airports. Lawrence Municipal Airport is categorized as a regional airport in the state airport and federal airport system plan. So we are at the top of the rung. After the study was concluded, recommendation was made to the FAA, which they concurred and approved, to provide funding for this fence. It is a wildlife hazard fence. There is no security method or measure involved with this, and it gets bandied about, but it is a wildlife hazard fence designed to keep critters off the airport property. We have had, over the years, a deer herd that like to hang out on the west side of the airport in the Oxbow area. As a measure of the study, we've reduced habitat. We do have badgers out there that burrow underneath. We have fox, we have coyotes, and you could have a long line of pilots come up here and anecdotally tell you their incursions with animals on the runway, particularly the KU pilots that come in late at night. So we bring this plan, which is not a full perimeter plan. As you can see from the diagram with the property line, it is shrunk down to cover operational areas and have some agricultural activity outside that fence area. This is a truly unique situation. This airport has a footprint of 486 acres. We have calculated that approximately 349 acres will be touched by the fence in one measure or another. So we've worked very hard with the tenant farmer that the city works with to try to minimize any agricultural impact to their opportunity to earn an income. Now, the FAA will say that it's not their concern, and they would prefer not to have agricultural activity on airports because it attracts wildlife. So inside the fence, there will be no farming activity whatsoever. Outside, we'll have some farming activity within the footprint of the acreage. There will be multiple gates on the fence to provide access for maintenance, first responder access, airport operations, what need be. Only one electric automated gate will be on Bryant Way off Airport Road for the T-Henninger tenants to access the property. And there will be no locks on these gates because, again, it's not a security gate. Airport personnel will be responsible for making sure that the gates are closed. At some point, there may be a padlock or two thrown on some of the further north gates, but that's yet to be determined. To try to answer this gentleman's question in a short version, the master plan did call, which was completed about 4 years ago, does call for a perimeter fence, which at that time the FAA policy was 3 strands of barbed wire around the entire perimeter. So obviously we've elevated the standard, and this standard of this fence was actually executed and implemented back in November of last year. So this is a brand new style of fence that's going up. And our company has put up between 3 to 4 dozen fences at client properties in the last 34 years of our company history. So this is the first 10-foot fence. And also Hayes Municipal Airport in Hayes, Kansas is now underway with a similar size fence that the FAA has mandated because they had deer running across their runway when FAA people were out there and they didn't like that. So it's a very similar project, almost identical in linear footage, number of gates, and price tag. To answer the question about the runway extension to the south, which is the only extension left that's viable for this airport, is probably several years off. We will have to document the number of aircraft using, the type of aircraft, and then Right now, in the current funding stream with FAA, the likelihood of this type of extension is not very likely. So we probably won't see it in our lifetime unless something truly unique and significant happens out at the airport. Does that answer your first question or your biggest question? Okay. What was the other question?
Primarily about where that fence that you have designed very well. I'm not anti-airport. I live out there. We're good neighbors. But you're going to be funneling thousands of coyotes directly into my backyard. And nowhere for them to go. 2440 is going to get the name of Peak Jersey Highway real fast.
All right.
Because those coyotes that come from the I-70 side have run the same path for, you can see it from Google Earth. They
Sure.
go behind Garrett's farm, go down.
Okay.
Culvert.
If we could bring it back to the
Yes.
applicant here. Thanks.
So, kind of an extended overview of the project. Our goal is, with your approval tonight on this and FAA signing off on the grant here in the next 60 days, we hope to be under construction end of July, 1st of August, with a approximately 100-day construction window. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. This is a high priority project for the FAA and the Central Region Office out of Kansas City. They are paying 90% of it, so anytime you have somebody paying 90%, it's a good deal. Of course, when somebody's paying 90%, you do have some of their rules and regulations to follow. I urge the commission to vote for this and approve it and allow the airport to move forward because it is a major improvement and enhancement for the airport. I'll take any questions that you may or may not have, or I will be off to the side if you come up,
Thank
have
you.
some later.
We may have some. Thank you. If there's further public comment on the matter,
I just have one comment. He was
Okay.
very polite and he answered some of my big questions.
please come up to the mic. And did you sign in?
No, my name's Scott Swedland. I own the far two eastern curb cuts on the south side of 2440 up against the crash zone in that house by the side of the road. My main concern is all of the vermin, all of the animals that all of a sudden have a safe place to breed are going to come over to my house. I'm trapped between 40 highway and 70, so I can't police this in a way that would be typical for country living to handle something like that. And that's just my main concern is if all of a sudden I am overrun with, everything from high smiles to, coyotes to whatever, and it becomes a safety issue, who's got some liability because they just put a fence funneling every animal for 1,500 acres into my yard. So I just want to make sure that they thought about that. There's only 2 of us that even live out there that are going to be affected by it, but we're going to get hit hard. There's a lot of animals out there. So that was my question: is what happens to us when everything that the coyotes eat, which is considerable, is all now in my backyard? So I just wanted to throw that out to you guys and let you know that there are two households that are going to be really affected by the design of the fence. I'm not against the fence. I'm not against keeping people off the road. I just don't want a health issue in my house because I can't control the population of mice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further public comment? We'll give the applicant a moment to reply to any public comment that has anything else you'd like to add.
I think I've covered everything
unless you have
a specific
All right. that pops up. Well, we'll see. We'll bring it back up here to the commission for discussion. Motions? Commissioner Carpenter.
I just had some questions about the actual fence design. Okay, so you're probably the right person, right? The packet says it's 10 feet. When you look at the diagram, it's 10 feet to the top of it. It looks like some scale of chain link, and then you've got strands of barbed wire sticking up another 2 or so feet. What's the purpose of the barbed wire up there?
I'm going to tell you this with a straight face, but nobody's going to believe me. But there are documented instances of deer jumping 10 feet over a fence.
Well, in fact, I had that question at our mid-month meeting, just how high the fence had to be to keep out deer, because I'm aware of people that put up 12-foot fences, double
Yes.
fences to keep deer out of their gardens out in the
So
country.
your question is an excellent one. The old standard used to be 8 feet, and years ago, it used to be 6 feet. So I'm not sure what they're feeding the deer. So it has progressed up to 10 feet, and then at the top, it is a 1-foot outrigger that angles away from the fence towards the outside of the property with 3 strands of barbed wire.
I think the barbed wire is probably what's giving some public perception that this is partially a security fence because of being topped with barbed wire. So that was, and what's the mesh size? I mean, you're not going to be keeping out mice and squirrels with that, are you?
No, it's standard chain link design.
Okay.
I don't have it in front of me,
So a
but
lot of
it's
the coyote food's going to be running
coyote would
right
have a
through the
difficult
fence,
time.
but
difficult time getting through there. And then there is 5 feet of fabric mesh that from the, you can see from the diagram there,
underground.
is approximately a 45-degree angle away from the base of the fence, approximately 2 feet away, that they'll skin that back, put that fabric down, and then cover it. And according to the experts at the FAA, that's designed to keep the burrowing creatures out from underneath the fence.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. I mean, we're not keeping the coyote food from crossing the runway. I mean, the mice and the squirrels are going straight through, and we're not keeping any birds out. So
Well, the bird issue, which is another good point, is the city staff out at the airport has done an excellent job since the wildlife study was created and adopted and adapted to keep birds away. There's always going to be birds, but the fact that the city has transitioned what will be the core and interior of the operations area away from active agricultural area, it has dispersed bird flocks. And the pesky Canadian geese, which used to be a problem, are pretty intermittent now. We've sent them to other places and discouraged them from habitating out there at the airport. But birds are always going to be an issue.
are you using noise to discourage the birds at all?
Noises, dogs, chasing them down in four-wheelers, non-lethal means because it's inside city property, so we're not allowed to discharge firearms. But you can use the pellet bags, fired from a shotgun, things like that. That'll, sometimes the guys have driven through the flock and went on down to another location, and the birds just follow right in behind them. So it's a cat and mouse game.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Willie?
A further question. How many acres are going to be taken out of agricultural production with the fence? I know it's as constrained as it can be.
It's a great question, and at this moment, it is hard for me to give you a quantifiable answer. As I mentioned earlier in the discussion, the airport takes up approximately 486 acres. Up to the moment that this fence became a viable project, we were farming quite a sizable acreage on the airport property. Now, the fence, as I also said earlier, we're approximating about 349 acres will be impacted with the fence running through it. So, simple math, we're like at 150 acres. That will be outside the fence area. And we've worked very hard with the city. Scott Wagner, who handles the leases and stuff, have worked to minimize. And on the south end of the property, as Mr. Sweedland was pointing out, where he has his concerns, we have actually reduced the footprint and kept it away from the highway itself. So it will be having kind of a natural flow around the runway protection zones and the instrument landing lights, which are the big Mausers that when you drive by and see those will be all fenced in. The rest of it will be open territory for farming. So don't hold me to it, but it might be 150, it might be 133. It's kind of in flux right now, and but we've done our best to minimize the impact of taking away, Class 1 soils out of that area.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Further questions for the applicant? I have one question. Just a clarification, we received a letter from a citizen worrying about the fencing going south of Highway 24, but that doesn't seem to be correct.
Yes, Chuck Souls and I have talked about that. We have not been able to get a hold of him yet. I tried to call today and I didn't get an answer. What is south of the airport is city-owned property, but it is fenced in because it's part of the instrument landing system and needs to be under security and protection from people trying to do that equipment harm. There will be nothing running across the highway, so I'm not quite sure where his confusion comes from. And I was hopeful my call would eliminate that confusion and clarify it for him, and also reaffirm the belief that, just like Mr. Willie asked, about taking cropland out of production as well. And we'll continue to try to get a hold of him and alleviate those concerns.
Any further questions for the applicant? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we'll bring it back up to the commission for further discussion or motions. Questions for staff? Commissioner Willie?
I think we have an obvious safety issue, and we've got the time where the funding is available, and I think that this is something that we'll need to move forward with for the safety of the pilots and the people that use the airport. So I will be voting in favor of it. I'm happy to make a motion in that regard if you'd like me to.
I welcome the motion.
Okay. Let's see. I would make a motion that we accept the site plan that has been presented to the Airport Zoning Commission for the construction of a wildlife hazard fence at the Lawrence Municipal Airport at 1930 Airport Road.
Thank you. Motion by Commissioner Willie, second by Commissioner Kelly. Any further discussion on the motion?
I just want to comment, I hadn't thought about where the wildlife is diverted to until the public comment tonight. That is an interesting question, and I think that's something that I hope the airport will work with the property owner if that actually is something that turns out to actually occur, because it could be that, the airport and the city could be in the role here of possibly creating some sort of nuisance, and I hope that there be actions taken to try to abate that if this is what occurs. But otherwise, I believe all the comments are correct. I mean, there is a need to keep deer off of the runway, especially at night when they're going to be attracted to lights that come on. And so I'm going to vote in favor of it, but I do appreciate that comment about where the wildlife is going to be diverted to. And that's something that's considered down the road.
I also share the concerns of Commissioner Carpenter and Mr. Sweedland about the diversion of animal traffic, and I hope that will be monitored and some abatement can be taken, measures can be taken if it proves to be a problem. Any further discussion? Then all of those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Motion passes 8-0. Thank you. On to our new item 2, rezoning request on Indiana Street.
We have to close the...
Oh, and now we will reconvene as the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission.
Commissioners, can I remind you to speak up a little bit? It's a little bit of trouble to hear even from my position here, so speak up. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Becky Pepper with the Planning Department. The item before you tonight is a rezoning for 4 properties on Indiana Street. These properties are located on the west side of Indiana in the Peakney neighborhood. They're identified here in red. The properties are currently zoned RS5, and the request is to be rezoned to RS7. The zoning in the area is predominantly RS5, and there is RS7 zoning adjacent to the east. And the request for the RS7 zoning stems for a desire for potential development of accessory dwelling units on these properties. Accessory dwelling units are land use that is not permitted in the RS5 zoning district, but is permitted in the RS7 zoning district. The land use in the area, the residential land use in the area is predominantly single family, which identified here in yellow. There is also some duplex and multi-dwelling, multifamily land uses within the area also. Aside from the residential land use in the area, there is also the Cobb wastewater treatment facility to the north, and then Lawrence Hospital here to the west, as well as other medical facilities. Peakney Elementary School is located south, and then Bircham Park here to the west. The rezoning request does conform with the comprehensive plan, which calls for low-density residential development in this area. And the rezoning is suitable for the RS7 zoning district. RS7 zoning requires a minimum lot width of 7,000 square feet. The lot widths of these properties are listed, shown here, and they're all exceed that 7,000 square feet requirement. So staff recommends forwarding the rezoning application to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval based on the findings listed in the staff report. With that, I will stand for any questions.
Thank you. We'll let you know if we have some. Is the applicant or a representative of the applicant here tonight?
Hello, I'm Summer Wiedemeyer. I submitted the application for the rezoning.
Anything you'd like to add to the report that Becky just gave?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Is there any public comment on this agenda item tonight? Well, all right. Seeing none, then we'll bring it up to the commission for discussion, questions, or motions. Commissioner Kelly.
So I'm excited about this. Seems to be the size of the lots and the fact that RS7 is right across the street. The infill development possibilities seem good, considering that close by in that neighborhood, we just got rid of a bunch of lots to make way for parking lots. So I'd be happy to make a motion to support the recommendation. So I'll do that.
I would welcome that.
I will motion to recommend approval of the request to rezone approximately 1.13 acres from RS5 single dwelling district to RS7 single dwelling residential district based on the findings presented in the staff report and forwarding it to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval.
Motion by Commissioner Kelly. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Carpenter. Is there further discussion on this agenda item? Seeing none, all those in favor of recommending approval, please raise your hand. Passes 8-0. Thank you. Moving on to our new item 3, 2645 Haskell. Hello again, Sandy.
Evening, again. This minor subdivision variance comes before you as part of your purview in the Planning Commission to approve subdivision design. The minor subdivision is still in the review process at the staff level. We also have a site plan for the proposed south lot of this property. The reason it's before you is the property abuts Haskell Avenue on its east property, and Haskell Avenue does not meet the current design standards for Principal Arterial Street. The applicant's requesting a variance to allow the street right-of-way to remain as it is. This is a copy of clip of the proposed minor subdivision, the two lots that are proposed. Haskell Avenue with its existing 50 feet of right-of-way that's measured to the center line. And then the subject property is here shown on the right side here along Haskell Avenue. The right-of-way here along Haskell is a little bit wider than it is further to the north. Staff is supportive of this particular variance request, and this is very comparable to other subdivisions that we have considered recently within the developed context of our urban area. So we see this similar request on Bob Billings Parkway, on 23rd Street, on South Iowa, and this is the same request comparable to what you've considered previously. Staff recommends approval of the variance, and the minor subdivision then would go on presumably to be completed with staff's review administratively, and then any easements that are associated with this project would eventually go to the city commission.
All right. Thank you, Sandy. Is the applicant or a representative of the applicant here tonight? Hi.
Hello, my name is Aaron Gaspers with CFS Engineers, representing the owner. I don't have anything to add. Sandy covered everything, but if there's any questions, be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any members of the public care to comment on this agenda item? Seeing none, we will bring it back up to the commission for discussion, questions, or motions.
I guess,
Commissioner Kelly, Commissioner Willie?
Sandy, I still have ask for some clarification. So the current right-of-way width, is that the 150 or the 100?
It's at 100.
Okay.
They have 50 feet on their side, 50 feet on the other side, for the total 100.
And that was supposed to be changed, and they're asking to maintain it as it has been?
Correct. The subdivision regulations, when they were adopted in 2006, requires that wider right-of-way than how much of our urban area has been developed.
Will there be any need for that additional right-of-way on this street, or is it not accepted?
In this segment, no, with the exception that we are looking at some intersection, future intersection improvements that we may have to address in the future. We're looking at easement potentially on the corner of that, but it would not necessarily affect the design of this project.
Are there other properties in the area that would also benefit from a variance like this, and have they been contacted?
It's a requirement of the subdivision regulations, so it's unlikely that some of those properties to the north and south, certainly on the east side, there's no expectation that those properties are going to be further subdivided. They're developed residentially. That it could potentially come up on properties to the north. There are some larger lots that could potentially be maybe redeveloped residential lots.
So the concern that we got in the communication from an owner on the other side, on the east side of Haskell, that wouldn't be affected because in any future?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to follow up on Commissioner Willie's question, in the future, if there was a perceived need to widen Haskell, is it the city policy to always try to take equal parts from both sides if the space is available? Or you look at the side that has the greater space available?
I think it's,
That's a Chuck Souls
it
question.
is, I was looking for Chuck to see if he was still here. It really is a Chuck Souls, because my limited understanding is that it's just context-based. If we think we need it on one side or the other for whatever reason, then we will work to negotiate that right-of-way. It's really just very it's not always the case that the pavement is in the center of the right-of-way, for example. So you might have storm, you might have a host of utilities on one side and only room enough to go on the other side. You know, so there's a lot of different reasons that you would pick up one side or the other, or equal sides.
And whether you're putting in, what type of intersection?
Have intersection, roundabouts versus signals versus.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Further questions or comments? Commissioner Willie?
Do we usually see the site plan at the same time that we see a variance request?
You do not usually see the site plan at all, unless you're the airport zoning commission.
Which we so rarely are.
further discussion? Motion.
I'll make a motion.
Will you make a motion? Commissioner Kelly.
I move to approve the variance requested for a minor subdivision, MS 17-00251, variance request to reduce the right-of-way, Form Section 2810A5, for a principal arterial street from 150 to 100 per Section 2813G of the Land Development Code for property located at 2465 Haskell Avenue.
Commissioner. Motion by Commissioner Kelly, seconded by Commissioner Willie. Any further discussion?
I did have one question for
Commissioner
staff
Sands.
that I was trying to formulate as the motion was made. So the area directly above that, it's kind of sparsely built RS10. So I guess my question would be the relative likelihood of Haskell being expanded, you know, sometime in the future if that RS10 develops to its density. Do we really expect Haskell to go beyond its role right now as a minor arterial?
No, I think what you would see is if there's any sort of turn lane improvements or anything.
Traffic
it would
calming
be
and-
the responsibility
Okay.
of, you know, whatever subdivision that might go in there. And this is an example of where I think the city engineer takes a very hard look at these to determine whether or not we have the right-of-way for the foreseeable future to accommodate the street system. Most of the time, we're before you with a yes answer, you know, recommending to adjust it under the code. You have the rare instances where we saw it at 31st in Osdale, where the city engineer said, no, we really need the right-of-way. And so this is just a good compare and contrast on those two types of projects. In this instance, we have enough right-of-way. We don't see any other lane improvements or anything. But it's a good point, it's a good question, Commissioner Sands, in that a lot of times you'll see new turning lanes in an area, and those are usually the requirement of that development to install and provide any additional right-of-way necessary, usually in front of their property.
Thanks. Any further questions or discussion? We have the motion in a second. Let's vote. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Passes 8-0. Thank you. Now to our new item 4, CUP for cell tower on North 100 Road.
So this request is for a new wireless communications facility located in Douglas County. The proposed tower is located on the north side of 1000 Road, and it's within 3 miles of the city of Eudora. In most cases, you would have convened to have a joint meeting with the city of Eudora, but they are not here this evening. They forwarded to you a communication that they were in support of the project with the condition or stipulation that it be moved further to the north. The project is outside of any identified urban growth area, and let's see, we talked about that. So the surrounding zoning is County A agricultural. The surrounding land uses, there is some amount of floodplain on this property, although the proposed tower location would not encroach into that floodplain. There are a number of residential uses located primarily along the county road. The proposed tower is represented by this symbol here, and I'm really just looking at this 1 mile square. A couple of other uses in the general area are a private airfield, which is located to the northwest. There is another wireless communication facility about 4 miles to the west, and a water tower also located a couple of miles to the southwest of the proposed project.
Sandy, can you show us where the cell tower is on that map?
This little dot
That
right
dot
here.
right there. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Need a few more minutes?
No, sorry to
Okay.
interrupt, but just
Okay.
saving us time.
As far as the suitability goes, this project was submitted under the county code prior to the adoption of the very recently amended wireless communication facility regulations. So we are still reviewing it under that older piece, although there is much of that regulation that is still the same. A couple of things that did not change were the preference to that agricultural zoning district, which this project is located in, and then a conditional use permit does not alter the base zoning. So the continuation of the agricultural zoning is still in place even if a conditional use permit is approved. The property is not currently vacant. It is agricultural ground. It is predominantly agricultural ground, but there is an existing residence and outbuildings that have been established since at least 1940s. And this is some of the earliest aerial maps the city has of the area. Some of the detrimental effects or impacts that we have of the project that we typically take a look at are things like lighting and traffic. Most typically in this particular project, there is no manned operations, so the access to the tower facility will be something equivalent to a farm access to this property. The tower height is under 200 feet. It is not mandatory required to have lighting for this type of facility, and the improvement does not encroach on the regulatory floodplain. We talked a little bit about some of the floodplain pieces in terms of this wireless facility. The lease area, again, this is located here in the southeast corner of the property, is 75 feet by 75 feet with an access easement that comes into the property, and then the tower and the ground improvements would be within that base. So you look at the site plan, the fenced area is a little bit smaller than that 75 by 75, and that does allow for other communication providers to come in and locate within that lease area. But the application that we're seeing tonight is for that smaller fenced area. There are no sensitive soils within this particular development area. There are some sensitive soils that are located in the northeast corner of that property. Access we've touched on a little bit, and building setback is also an issue that we have talked about with staff and with the applicant. Staff's recommendation is that the tower get moved further to the north. That's reflected in your recommendation. And that really has to do with the requirements for future road widening that would be effective for N1000 Road or County Road 458. As far as a fall zone goes, the applicant did provide a letter indicating that the design of the tower would be such that it would collapse within a certain area. And as the applicant moves forward with a building permit, they will need to provide that more finalized engineering justification of its fall zone. As I mentioned, the overall height is under 200 feet, and this is just a graphic to show how that lease area works with the initial fenced area and then the tower. This is called a self-support tower. It is different than a monopole, and it does allow for multiple carriers to be co-located on it more easily. The current code that this application was submitted under required that there be at least 3 platforms or three opportunities to co-locate additional equipment on. The application as proposed is showing us 4. There is no landscaping proposed with this project. Typically we do look at site plans that have landscaping to screen certain kinds of equipment. In the last several communication towers, we have not seen those unless they have had an urban application, where we've talked about maybe street trees. In this particular field, this particular application, the tower would be located in an agricultural field. There would not be any reasonable expectation that there would be ongoing maintenance or irrigation systems to support planting around the base of that tower. This is an exhibit that is intended to reflect what the applicant has proposed, the location of the tower area enclosure, and then the striped area is what would be the future right-of-way at its maximum width, and then what a setback would look like within this project. So staff is recommending that the project get moved further back to the north to be able to protect and preserve that public right-of-way. There is really only that one condition that is reflected in staff's recommendation. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Sandy. Sir, the applicant or representative of the applicant here tonight?
Pulling up the slide that's got the red dot of the 150. Just leave that up.
I'm sorry, which one?
The one that showed the 150.
This one?
Yep, that one.
There you go.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Vincent O'Flaherty. I represent the applicant, MW Towers. Here tonight, on behalf of MW, is also Mr. Paul Rablica. MW Towers is a Kansas limited liability company of which Mr. Rablica is an owner. We ask you tonight to approve the application for the conditional use permit, and I can tell you the condition that the staff has placed upon the application of moving the tower back 150 feet, I had the slide pulled back, is acceptable to the applicant. We've met, discussed that, we're willing to do that, so that condition is acceptable to us. I'd like to speak briefly about two other things. First, to give you a little background about MW, and then third, talk about the recent Kansas cell tower statute real quickly. With respect to the applicant, Mr. Rablica has been working in the cell tower industry for over 30 years. MW Towers has developed and built over 25 towers like this and in the eastern Kansas and western Missouri area here over the last 10 years. His goal and our goal is to improve the wireless communications in the Eudora area and access to that rural community. Which brings me to my second point, and that is the recent Kansas statute, which you may or may not be aware of. It is called the Kansas Wireless Deployment Act. It's statute 66-2019. I ask you to keep that in mind as the public comments, because there's a number of things stated in that statute passed in 2016 which relate to our application, one of which is the Kansas public policy that towers do provide a significant economic impact on this area, and their development is encouraged by state statute. Also in the same statute, there's discussions about what you as a commission and the public can and cannot consider. And several of those considerations are ones being raised by the public today that by statute you are not to consider. I won't go into those specifically. I don't want this to become a legal exercise, but there is now Kansas public policy established by the legislature that does apply to our application. So with that, we're not aware of any other conditions being placed on the tower. We're willing to accept the one staff has placed, and we would respectfully request that the application be granted. If you have any questions to me or Mr. Rablica, we'd be glad to address them.
Thank you.
Okay,
If
thank
we
you.
do, we'll let you know. This is a public discussion item, so we welcome comments from the public. If somebody would like to approach the podium, please sign in. You have 3 minutes if you're representing yourself and 5 minutes if you are speaking on behalf of an organization.
Well, this is my first time here, so
Welcome.
I represent 3 different property owners, so I don't know if I get any more time, but I'll try to be brief. But my name is Patrick Kelly, and not to be in full disclosure, I don't know Commissioner Kelly, but other than we share a good Irish name. So, but I am in opposition of this conditional use permit for a variety of reasons. And just to give you a little quick background, I am the owner of property located at 949 East 2100 Road in Eudora, which consists of 80 acres. Co-owner of the property located at 951 East 2100 Road, consisting of 80 acres. Co-owner of property across the road from the proposed tower site within 1,000 feet of it. There's 60 acres. And I'm here representing also my mother, Rosaline Kelly, who owns the property that adjoins the proposed cell tower to the east and consisting of 122 acres. And she's in a nursing home and could not be here tonight. So as you can see, there's a pretty sizable agricultural base there. And one of the reasons is certainly a decrease in property values. All of us have worked very hard over the years to build our properties up and don't want to see our properties values and appreciation and marketability of our properties be negatively impacted. And in talking to several real estate professionals, they have told me that there's a very strong possibility that that would happen. So very concerned about decline in property values, which could seriously financially hurt a lot of us. The aesthetics, I don't know how else to say it, cell towers are just ugly. They, either dull gray or, bright paint and lights. And a 190-foot tower, if you can kind of think about that, it's 18 to 19 stories of a building. And most rural residents and landowners out there, we moved out there or own property for a reason, to enjoy the natural settings and not to look at an imposing and unsightly tower. Historically, I have some concerns because the property that adjoins it, the little Wakarusa runs through there, and there is a crossing of the Oregon Trail. And over the years, many people have enjoyed the Oregon Trail, visiting that trail. And I know that in talking to the Oregon Trail Association, they've had some concerns, and I think we're going to write a letter in regard to their concerns. The National Park Service, I think, has got some concerns. I know the Santa Fe Trail had worked with Marion County, and Marion County had basically with a cell tower that went up, and I know that they said that they had asked that it be at least under 200 feet and at least a half a mile away. Now the tower is reportedly to be below the 200 feet, but based upon the location, it's about 1/10 of a mile from the Oregon Trail crossing. I think there's some safety hazard issues that I'd like to bring up because it appears as part of this conditional use permit that they are looking for an additional entry and exit off of County Road 458, or I guess what's called now North 1000 Road. And there is already 2 entry exits on that existing property, and I'm not sure why there would need to be a third. And I guess I would ask the commission to check if under the zoning code, if that would even be allowed based upon the frontage of that property. Another concern is based upon the actual fall zone for the tower, because I know they're talking about moving it back, but there's actually a natural gas well located on the property very close to the cell tower's proximity. And natural gas wells can emit flammable gases, and I think there's some concerns that with a cell tower, there's electrical utilization of sources of electrical, whether it be to power the transmitters or any of the equipment. It could be static electricity. And because of the size of the towers and the construction of the towers, they can be a focus for lightning strikes. And I think that I would encourage the commission to take a hard look at a safety issue on that. I'm not sure if the Kansas Corporation Commission has been consulted. their oil and gas to see, division to see if there's been any, if they have any guidance on that because of a safety issue. And I think that another concern is low-flying aircraft on that particular property where the cell tower is being proposed. There is a unregulated airstrip that is in operation that actually, I believe it would be, not even sure if they're classified aircraft, but they are ultralight powered parachutes that are using that as an airstrip for landing and takeoff. And those type of aircraft are unregulated. The pilots are unlicensed and don't have the skills and trainings. And I think with a tower of that nature at 190 feet, I think there's some concerns with safety. Additionally, many of us in the agriculture business use ag pilots, crop dusters, and there's concerns about safety with crop dusters and their safety. And I would just also like to get a clarification. They said the tower doesn't have to be lit. However, Congress on July 15th of 2016 signed into law the FAA Extension Safety and Security Act of 2016. And under the provisions of this act, the FAA is required to adopt rules to require the marking and lighting of freestanding tower structures with heights between 50 and 200 feet, which are located in rural and undeveloped agricultural areas.
I'm going to have to call your attention to the clock.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Is there further public comment? This is the public comment section. If you could state your name and address, please.
Justin Kelly, related to this Patrick Kelly here. I'm a resident actually in Olathe, Kansas, 18962 West 118th Street. Give me just a minute, let me finish my address here.
I promise that I will pay more attention to the clock this time.
Okay, I'm here to speak on behalf of two landowners. One is my father, Steve Kelly, who could not be here tonight. He is a co-owner of the land directly to the south, also owns a piece of ground about a half a mile southwest. Also, my grandmother, Rosaline Kelly, who my Uncle Pat talked about, she could not be here tonight. She's in a nursing home. She owns the ground directly to the east, the adjacent property. A couple of the items I wanted to talk about and voice for these two landowners. I did speak directly to a farmer 2 days ago who farms in the immediate area, and I know there's multiple farmers that farm in the immediate area, but he says farmers in the area, including him, do aerial spray. They crop dust there, and he says it will have a direct impact on how they spray, and it may not allow them to spray anymore depending on the winds and the type of season. So he said it will restrict the way they crop dust or eliminate it. It's a 190-foot tower, and if you've ever seen crop dusters, they fly above tree line. And also, I think as staff mentioned, it is 190 feet tall, and it's unlit, and it's within 2 miles of an airstrip, and that's dangerous. Number two, the property does lie directly to the west of the Little Wakarusa River, and in areas of flood, there will be washout within the river, and if there's any kind of contaminants that come off the cell tower, it would likely get in the Little Wakarusa. which would affect all landowners downstream, anyone that enjoys being in the river, anyone enjoys fishing in the river. It's a natural streamway. Lastly, I would also like to state, I am outside the immediate area, but I am a landowner along with my brothers in a property about 1.5 miles south. We participated with the state a few years ago on a wetlands project. And there is a major flyway that goes through this area, and we have been able to enjoy migratory birds that come in on our wetlands that do pass through that area. And we're concerned about how that affects that flyway. So, again, I appreciate it, and certainly opposed. So, thank you.
Thank you. Is there further public comment?
Hi, I'm Barbara Braw, and I am one of the adjacent owners on 2100 Road, and I would just like to point out a few things that maybe we haven't talked about yet. I would like to echo the birdway, and hadn't thought about that as yet, but we are, our property is to the east, slightly north, and there are a lot of birds that fly through there. We see herons regularly. You know, it's great, lots of hawks, things like that. So I do appreciate having that added to the mix. Some of the things that I was concerned about or would ask is, no one's mentioned what this fencing looks like, how big and obtrusive that would be, how unaesthetic it might be. Other cell towers I've seen through some work that I do, they're terribly unattractive, high fence, barbed wire at the top, so we don't know, I don't know from what I've seen what it's going to look like. I wondered why we would need the self-supporting. I'd have heard some of the reasons, but if we have to have one, would a monopole be less obtrusive in this area, would be one of my questions. The other part that concerns me is that, because again of something that I've worked with elsewhere, sometimes these come in and the land use around it then is harmed considerably. Granted, this is ag. The one I'm talking about was 2B residential development, but we are really pretty close to Eudora, and they've been growing pretty well over the years. So having this be in that potential growth zone, even though I heard from staff that, you know, we aren't officially in that growth zone. If you look at the houses down 2100, you'll see that they are expanding down that road. There's new development just immediately to the west. Someone's putting in new housing and buildings there. So it is a fairly active area. I don't know if that slide could be brought back up because I don't know how to use this, but if you look at the number of houses that are affected by that area, you'll see that it's not inconsiderable number of homes. I wondered if the tower folks would tell us. They said they have many of these towers in the area. It would be nice to be given an address of one or two so that staff and or concerned citizens can take a look and see what they look like once they're built. I was concerned about a lot of things. You'll have like 14 questions that I wanted to draw your attention to, so I won't go into those. A lot of my questions have been answered, maybe not necessarily to my satisfaction, but I'd just like to consider some of the aesthetics, which you may or may not be able to consider, but if we could get more information about that, I think it would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further public comment on this item? Anyone? All right. Yes, sir.
My name is Michael Braw, and I just have one quick point. Questioning the need for another tower. From our property, standing flat on the ground, we can already clearly see at ground level line of sight 2 other tall towers. And I wonder, well, why is a third one necessary here? And I personally have never heard of any lack of cell capacity in our area, in our rural area. I don't know if it's just to provide competing providers for cell services out there or what. But, you know, it's pretty interesting when we can see the lights blinking on 2 towers from just sitting in our deck or walking out our front door. So that's it.
Thank you.
Mark Elston, 2106 North 1000 Road, basically right to the west of the property. My question is the same thing. 190 feet, you got a tower here, It's not going to increase your internet service. No brainer. No brainer. That's it.
Thank you.
It's only 190 feet, so the other towers are going to get the internet, not that one. No brainer.
Any further public comment?
Only that I forgot my pen.
Well, one more question. Who's getting the profit off this? That was never mentioned. Who's getting that? That was my question. Richardson's gonna get profit off from it. That was never mentioned. Somebody's gonna get a profit off from it.
May I
Thank
take
you.
my other 20 seconds? If not, I have just one thing I forgot to say, but if...
Please.
Okay. Sorry, that is the other concern I had, is that the lease holder, the property owner, the one that I deal with, the person retained the ownership of the lease and then moved away. So then they don't do anything to keep care of the surrounding area. So I don't know what the situation is here, but it would be interesting to know. Thank you.
Is there any further public comment?
I'm just going to make sure I sign in.
Okay. Thank you. Then if there is no further public comment, we offer the applicant an opportunity to respond to the comments that have been made here.
Again, Vincent O'Flaherty on behalf of the applicant. With respect to the question about the fencing, it's going to be a 6-foot fence with 3 strands of barbed wire at the top. With respect to the question about who's getting the profit, the property is being leased from the ground owner, subject to a ground lease, and then any profit from the operations, MW Towers is the developer owner. With respect to comments about the floodplain, the birds flying, I point you again to the Kansas statute that says environmental impacts are not to be, and I'm paraphrasing here, a reason for denying an application. Also,
Sir, can you tell me what statute that is again?
yes. KSA 66-2019. And it's very lengthy with multiple subparts. With respect to other towers being in the area, again, that is stated by the statute, is not a consideration that can be grounds for rejecting an application. The engineers have indicated to my client that this area needs additional coverage, and that's why the tower's being placed where it is, and the application is being what it is. As to property values being decreased, there's no statistical evidence of that. In fact, Kansas public policy encourages the development of wireless structures as being an economic benefit. Let me make sure a couple. With respect to questions being raised about the safety hazards and the electrical will be brought in underground to the site, and all of that. With respect to whether there's a safety issue as to an additional entrance off the highway, that's not been raised by the staff to us. We understand and have indicated where we intend to put a gravel road, and staff has recommended our application. So we haven't had a chance to study that issue, but we believe it's not an issue here. And with respect to any other concerns being raised by the owners in the area, we'll be glad to sit down and visit further with them. We haven't had a chance to do that yet, but we'd be glad to do so, to address any other concerns they have. So those are my specific comments as to the issues that were raised.
Thank you. If we have any further questions, we'll let you know. I'm sorry, sir, the public comment. The public comment section is closed. I'm sorry. With that, we'll bring it back up to the commission for discussion, questions of the applicant or of staff. Commissioner Kelly.
So this question is for staff. If you guys could remind us, we've dealt with these wireless towers before. We know there's new legislation. There are limitations on what we are allowed to consider and not consider. And so I think it would be important for the public to hear from our staff what those guidelines are, not just from the applicant.
Two key considerations that you cannot consider, as mentioned by the applicant, was certainly you cannot consider other towers that are in the area. That cannot be a factor for your determination for a denial. Some of the other things that you cannot consider is the need, the justification for the communication tower. That falls under the applicant's proprietary information, cellular coverage, and those kinds of elements. Regarding the evidence of value loss, that's really something that is specifically on the shoulders and the burden of the property owners to show that economic loss. So it's not that you can't consider it, but you need to have very strong evidence to that end, and that applies very much to the county commission, who will be making that ultimate determination. Some of the environmental issues that more typically in my experience has been about harmful radiation and some of those kinds of things. Environmental factors that certainly are part of our purview are the regulatory floodplain. And I made a point of trying to show for you that the proposed tower location is not encroaching in the floodplain. If it were, there would likely be a local floodplain development permit, as we would for any kind of use that had structure in the floodway or the regulatory floodplain. It's not that it would have to be approved, it's that it would have to meet those design criteria if it were located in a floodplain. Does that help?
It does, thank you. Just to, if I can, a comment, I'll just share this with both the applicant and the public. We have dealt with these wireless towers before, and the laws that are created sometimes are in conflict with our charge as a planning commission, which I think sometimes will throttle our conversation or where we'd like to go and what we would like to talk about. Sometimes we can't, and we don't want to be stuck in a situation where we have we give legal recourse to come back a different direction. So I just share that for you all, that we've been frustrated by this before, almost all of us who've been up here before.
Commissioner Sands?
A question for staff on the proposed site drawings. And it was mentioned in there that up to 4 more facilities, but that doesn't mean up to 4 more towers. That means 1 tower with up to 3 or 4 more ground facilities, based on carriers that choose to put their panels on the tower.
That's correct.
Okay, so we're not looking at a tower array.
Correct.
Follow up from that question. the fencing, which was didn't include the entire leased area, and you mentioned that was for the potential of co-location. Is there a possibility of other towers being put in that footprint?
Not other towers, okay? Not another tower structure. What could be added in there are other pad sites for ground equipment such as the cabinets, the H-frames, the pieces that hold some of that communication, that communicate with the antenna that are mounted on there. So it's not necessarily unusual that we would see an application. The lease area is somewhat larger than what they're going to initially fence. If they get that third or fourth carrier coming in, then they would expand the fencing at that time.
Thank you.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Under the category other on page 19, right before the conclusion, you have a statement in the staff report that recent changes to federal laws allow some future modifications to approved and existing communication towers, which can include expanding the tower by up to an additional 20 feet and increasing the base station enclosure area by up to 10%, and that hasn't been considered by staff yet, according to the report. 190 feet doesn't require a light, but you add 20 feet and you're over the 200 for a light. Does that have to come back again or go through a subsequent modification to add that 20 feet permitted under the statute?
It would probably come back as a modification. Today, when we have an applicant co-locating on a tower, we do that administratively through the site plan, and we're really looking at that question: is the height being increased? Is the ground being increased? Are we still looking at appropriate construction building setback? How that change would apply to this tower or future towers under the regulation, I think that's probably something that still has to be explored. I'm not sure I have a exact answer how that's going to happen.
well,
or how that comes
I'm
out.
kind of asking this because we've got public comment going both ways on lights. Concerned that it might need a light, concerned that it needs a light for safety purposes. So I don't, it's kind of...
The lighting is guided by FAA.
Right, which is a 200 feet.
That's where it becomes mandatory.
But one of the letters was, what if it increases, can we end up with a light without any public comment? And if it can go up 20 feet,
Yes.
which would require a light, I'm just wondering if it gets public comment or not.
Commissioners, I would consider that issue of having the ability to go another 20 feet, conservatively thinking that as an administrative process because of how the laws are working on it. We can certainly talk to the county councilor about the effect of that, because I agree with you, it would appear to be a significant change. But again, the laws have evolved to the benefit of the cell tower industry that have been faced with these challenges. Many of these challenges presented tonight are very real issues, but can be applied almost anywhere in the nation. And because they have been applied everywhere, the industry has lobbied for more and greater in-depth laws that have really taken away a lot of commissions like you from applying a lot of standards that we had been applying for the last couple of decades, really. And so that helps put it a little bit in context, but I would urge you to consider that this has the potential to go up past 200 feet and be lit because of that. I don't know, I mean, it's our first one under these laws, so we're not sure if the industry is looking for loopholes to get, what they really want, or I've dealt with cell towers my entire career, and there's maybe a few games going on in the industry and with local communities, and we just have to be careful, but we have to have eyes wide open in looking at these things. So I would encourage you to have that knowledge that it could be a lit pole tower up to 210 feet.
And this brings me to my second question. There's also the statement on page 1.6 that the comprehensive plan does not explicitly address communication towers. Are we adding that to the new comprehensive plan that's coming up?
Not specifically. It's not, I mean, the comprehensive plan, as you know, is not at the 190-foot level. It's at the 10,000-foot level, so we're not addressing it specifically. I would also say to the industry's benefit that it's competing values. We all have cell phones now. It's kind of a necessary evil, if you will. And my experience with some of these challenges are that they don't exist in any meaningful way. The only studies I've ever seen on property values is that there are no effects on property values once these are installed and after some time has passed for the appraiser to review it. But certainly they're a little bit scary to come into any neighborhood. And we do our best to make sure that any real or perceived harms are mitigated to the best of our abilities. But we are becoming less and less able to prohibit them outright. And I think that's with good justification, because they are a necessary evil.
Commissioner Sands?
Question for staff. So we're not required to do a light study as part of this, but if it were to extend 20 more feet, require a light, should there be a light study done with it?
It is not part of the old regulation, nor is that part of the recently approved one. We've never, a photometric plan or a light study that we would look at for many other uses is a completely different animal than what this would be.
For this, and for this one, we're talking about a low blinking red light for visibility for...
To be honest, I'm not sure we can answer that question.
Yeah. It's a lot different than the lights over tennis courts, for example.
Right. Yeah, but there are some impacts with lighting, whether it's a kind of a white strobe light or a soft red glow, and perhaps the applicant has that information, I don't know.
Do you have more information about that, sir?
On that question, no. I do. But Mr. Ravelka does, but let me just address Commissioner Carpenter. We have no intention of going higher than 200 feet. We have no problem if you condition our application upon, if we were ever to go over 200 feet, we would come back for public comment to address your concern.
So you're willing to add that as one of the conditions we put in today?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And then
Thank
Mr.
you.
Ravelka on the other question.
Hi, Paul Rablica. As far as the lights on a tower over 200 feet or in airspace, the nighttime lighting is a red pulsing light that beats 30 strobes or 30 beats per minute. Side markers are anymore the same type of pulse because of birds. The steady lights confuse the birds, and that's when you have the bird strikes. I'm not aware of birds having strikes on towers without lights, and that's more the controversy with birds. But daytime lights are a white, that's a medium intensity white strobe.
Thank you.
Don't go away.
Commissioner Carpenter.
We've had people point out the location of an airstrip and such, and you've put up quite a few of these towers, so you've had to work with the FAA regulations in the past, would that be correct?
Yes, sir.
How does the FAA consider these towers and unregulated airstrips? Is there anything about distance or suggestions?
The FAA looks at airstrips that have FAR 77 protection, so mostly paved airstrips. The concern that was brought up about the ultralight, that's our landlord. He's aware of the tower that's going to be there, and he doesn't have a concern about the tower going up and him flying around the property.
And these are readily visible during the day, I take it.
Yeah,
these towers.
he's basically, it's a visual apparatus. He doesn't fly instruments and he doesn't fly at night.
All right, thanks.
Further commission discussion? Questions for staff? Commissioner Butler?
I do appreciate you guys coming and speaking before us today and looking at the statute that the representative, the applicant cited, and it does have under subsection F 18 different parts of that statute that we can't consider, but I didn't read anything in my haste to read it that doesn't allow us to consider what some of the residents have come and stated to us here today. I do share their concerns for, different issues that they've brought up concerning the approval of this cell tower or proposal for this cell tower. And frankly, looking at those 18 items under subsection F, I don't see any problem with my decision. I don't support it, and I'll vote against it, but I do appreciate you guys coming and letting us know what you think and what your concerns are. And again, I have, most of that statute is definitions, but there is part of that, which I've already cited, that does say what we're not able to consider. But I do think that, again, the issues brought forth by members of the community are relevant, and I don't believe that any of them are in specific contrast to what we can't consider under that statute. So that's my opinion.
Thank you. Further discussion, questions for staff?
I had a question for the applicant.
Yes.
So, how are the sites selected? I know that's probably more a question for the carrier, but who does determine that that's the optimal location?
Who decides that would be a combination of the developer in terms of contacting landowners of who's willing to lease their space in conjunction with the carriers providing coverage maps, areas that they want to have covered.
Okay.
I have a question for staff. In previous discussions of cell phone towers in the city and in Douglas County, the question, it was brought up in one of our communications tonight about the appearance of the tower, camouflage, tree-shaped things. I should say that the example given, and some of the other ones I've seen, a Douglas fir 190 feet in the middle of Kansas prairie is slightly out of place, not as out of place as the cell tower itself, but and whether the cell tower in our urban corridors is out of place anywhere anymore is open to question. They're going to be here, and we do rely on them. But I'm wondering about the appearance and the camouflage. Has any discussion happened with among staff about cell tower appearance?
The application, or the applicant may need to refresh my memory, but I believe I posed either a question or an email, a discussion about why a self-support over a monopole. And the monopole being something with a narrower profile, that the antenna are internal to the structure rather than attached to the structure. And I believe the response from the applicant was that they're more challenging to co-locate on because that space within that structure is more limited. That's really kind of where we left it, is my recollection. I also have share your aesthetic that 190-foot pine tree perhaps may not be appropriate in this particular application. Our rural applications are somewhat hampered because we don't have a lot of verticality in the county, in the area, to be able to smooth some of that out. So it will be obvious. It will be a structure of some sort.
Thank you. Further questions, discussion? Among commissioners? Commissioner Culver.
Question for staff. It was brought up that there was a historical marker or the trail nearby. Are there any restrictions in our land development code or anything in that regard that would factor into this situation?
During the review, that was the first that I had heard about the Oregon Trail or Santa Fe Trail in this area was my conversations with the residents as they contacted me. Within Douglas County, there are historical registered properties. There are none in this immediate location or for some miles outside of this. So that's not part of what's registered. An applicant will have to coordinate with the State Historic Preservation Office as part of their application review. And they will look at some of those national park standards through that process. They will be going through the state review for that. That does not come through the planning office. I did forward that information to the state, the application as well as map of the area. The information they provided back to me was that this particular tower is not in the immediate vicinity, but those maps are done at 1 to 24,000. They're on the quadrangle maps, so they're certainly not precise. There may be historic elements out there that we're unaware of, but there is nothing regulatory at the local level that we manage on that particular aspect.
Okay, thank you.
On that point, may I be heard?
Please.
We do have a letter from the State Historic Society saying the tower would have no adverse impact from their perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion? Commissioner Willie.
Make a comment. I appreciate everyone coming and sharing their concerns. One of the other towers you can see from that neighborhood sits on top of what was once known as Willie's Mound, which you might know is also my last name, that was a property owned by my family many generations ago and no longer is. But in pointing out the former home site of the Willie clan, it's the one under the big tower with the flashing light, which is always a shame. It does take away from kind of this aesthetic, but also this historic understanding of our rural neighborhoods. And I'm also a rural resident in Douglas County now also. It's one of these interesting questions where it has both a private good for one individual that gets paid, the landowner gets paid, yet everyone else has a visual impact. It has a public good in that we have cell phone coverage for those of us that live rurally that we do depend on. But it also has this public burden, I guess, that we all see it and have to live with it, and it becomes a part of the landscape that was never a natural part of the landscape. Unfortunately, I think that the way the law is written, it does not allow us to really regulate a lot of ways where these towers go, but also that they have to go somewhere, unfortunately, and they will be in someone's neighborhood, including mine, including yours in this case. I think I will vote for it. It's kind of with a heavy heart because I love our rural landscapes, but I think that we don't have a whole lot to stand on in terms of opposing it at this level. But continue to take your concerns to the county commission and see what they also say.
Commissioner Sands.
I'll just give my indication as well. I'm inclined to support it, but it's not because I'm that kind of person that likes to see towers go up. I think Commissioner Wiley put it really great. It's a public and private good that balances out anybody's individual viewpoint of it. And thank you, Commissioner, for mentioning how you read 6/6/2019, because at this point I'm wishing I would have gone to law school instead of got an MPA. But I will say in there, and I wouldn't mind your input on this also. It does say in one point there must be a reasonable basis for denial. 18G(c). I don't know how to read these things. And I key on that for a very specific reason, because if I get out my laminated copy of the golden factors, and to me it wouldn't be a planning commission if I didn't hold it up at just once. One of the golden factors is opposition or support of neighborhood residents. And it's one of the golden factors that actually says the least, and this is just one of the factors to be considered, and by itself is not sufficient reason to approve or deny a request. And so that's really a non-answer. There's nothing there that gives us an indication of which way we should lean. And so in that respect, I have to lean with the applicant and the property owner, because, well, the law in a way urges us to do so. But then also the point that you made, public good, maybe urges us to a little bit also. So I'll be in support of it. I also appreciate all the neighbors for coming out and giving us your feedback. When I initially looked at the packet before I got to the public comment portion, I thought, well, okay, it's a cell tower. We're kind of required to do this. It's a bit of a slam dunk. But I'm glad you all came out to say your piece, because it gives me, at least one member of the commission, a viewpoint that I would not have gotten out of the application. So thank you.
Further commissioner comment? Commissioner Kelly.
Signal, I'm going to echo a lot of what Commissioner Willie said. I thought she said it really well, so thank you, Karen. I suppose there was a time when people would come to city commission meetings and object to electrical telephone poles in their front yards. And now we just take them as being just part of the landscape, and we'll slowly move them underground. And there are some wireless ways of doing underground. I learned at the APA convention. So, maybe someday we'll be able to tear down all these towers and put them underground and bring back our Kansas prairies to the way they looked originally. I think this is always a tough one, because it's, as Scott said really nicely, it's a value judgment. And it's, what do you value? Do you value the public good of having that wireless infrastructure? It used to be that we would look at propagation maps and sort of be able to say, well, we don't need it here. It looks like, can we put it somewhere else? The new legislation takes that out. We can't even talk about that. So my point is that sometimes we have to do things for the common good, maybe over the individual rights. And I think Commissioner Willie said that really well. So I'll be supporting, if there is a motion, I'll be supporting a motion to the recommendation.
Commissioner comment? Commissioner Carpenter.
I take it it's the first time most of you have come to a planning commission meeting, and this is the type of thing that brings people for the first time. And I thank you for having the courage to stand up and state your position, because I know how hard it is to stand on that side of the podium and speak. I've been there multiple times. In fact, I've been there on this very issue in our neighborhood. But at that time, that was before the change in the Federal Telecommunications Act, which is now limited, even put bigger handcuffs on what we can consider. Because at that time, we could actually look at how close towers were to each other. And that particular tower was denied at the city commission level based on that and was ultimately relocated. But we can't even consider that now. And essentially, the Kansas statute is echoing what's changed at the federal level. And as our planning director pointed out, the telecommunications lobbyists have won the game so far and captured the field and told us what we can and can't do, and have made findings at both the congressional level and the state level that these towers are a public good. And to overcome that, we have to have a lot. And the actual location of this is, it's out of the floodplain. Just about anything that we could consider, this has been located just where it doesn't apply. And I don't like them. I really don't. I don't like the towers. I don't like how they look in the landscape. I don't like the fact that under our current law, the telecommunications industry or just somebody that wants to build a tower can choose to build it wherever they want. And it's forced to be part of every zoning category in our city. It is with a special use permit or in the county as a conditional use permit. We can't even limit zoning categories for where these are placed. They can be anywhere. And that's by operation of the federal level. And so I think we're kind of boxed into a corner of approving this, even though I think most people up here would prefer to say no. But we're boxed into that corner, and I'm thankful that we have a concession from the applicant to add that under this untested new statute that we could increase this by 20 feet, which would require a light, that they have agreed to bring it back to this commission so we can receive additional public comment about whether that light should be there. And I do appreciate that. So with that, I don't want to do this, but I'll make the motion if we're at that point. And at this time, I would move that we recommend.
Can I say one thing before you do that?
Yes.
So, to my knowledge, Mr. Carpenter and I are the attorneys up here, but neither one of us practice this type of law by any means. And I read the prohibition on what we can't consider as just those requirements, which leaves a whole bunch more that we can consider. So I do encourage, and I echo Commissioner Willie's comments, that you can move on to the City Commission and explain your opposition to this specific request to them. But I do think that that is a valuable right, and I do, again, think that those 18 things are what we can't consider, but there's a lot that we can. So I still, this is just my own side commentary as well. It always troubles me when we have people that come and cite statutes, rules, regulations that attempt, I take it as an attempt to force our hands, and I don't appreciate that, but I do understand everyone has a job to do. But I again, do encourage you guys to go further. So thank you for coming. Sorry.
And I think I might actually make the motion and then vote against it. I'm going to make the motion to include the concession we got, just to make sure that that's in there. So at this time, I'd move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of the conditional use permit for a communication tower wireless facility use subject to the following conditions. 1, provision of a revised site plan drawing that shows the location of the tower enclosure set back at least 60 feet from the right-of-way line, and the tower shall be set back 150 feet from the future right-of-way line per section 12-310 of the county zoning regulations. And 2, per the applicant's agreement that any increase in height that would require the installation of a light pursuant to FAA regulations will come back to the Planning Commission for additional public comment before modification to this conditional use permit.
A motion from Commissioner Carpenter. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Sands. Further discussion? Commissioner Coleman.
Yeah, just to add to the comments that have been made by other commissioners, and this is echoing some, so I'll be brief, but based on the criteria that we have in front of us, it does meet the findings that staff has provided and that the application is structured within. And given the consideration of other factors that we cannot consider in this case, I will be supporting the motion.
Further commissioner comment? I'll just say that I will be supporting this application very begrudgingly. When Commissioner Carpenter was standing on the side of that podium discussing the cell tower at 19th Street alongside the trail, I was sitting up here and I remarked that I could see the proposed tower from my second floor window. It also stood directly next to the trail upon whose steering committee I served. And I shared the concerns of the residents and trail users at that time surrounding that cell tower. But we voted to approve it, myself included, to approve it. It was later denied by the City Commission. I'll echo Commissioner Culver's statement that this proposal is in line with our comprehensive plan and with the findings of fact in the staff report. I do lament the condition of legislation and regulation concerning cell tower development and planning. And that is an issue for another day. For today, I want to thank everybody who came out to speak about this, both for and against. With that, I will just say that I will be, as I said, very begrudgingly supporting this application. If there's no further commission comment or questions, then we shall vote. All those in favor of the motion to recommend approval of the conditional use permit with the condition in the staff report and the condition 2 regarding the height and subsequent requirement for further public comment before any modification, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Motion passes 6-2.
Just a reminder to the public that you're a recommending body. This will go to the county commission sometime next month, likely. July 18th or 19th, most likely.
All right. Is there any further business, new or old, miscellaneous? Then we are adjourned.
John, Bear?
This wasn't yours, was it?
Yes, sir.
Good job.